New Mexico is facing a major housing shortage, especially for its poorest working families, with only 41 rentable, affordable homes for every 100 low-income residents, according to the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. Across the state, communities and lawmakers are seeking solutions, whether converting blighted areas to high-density housing, building tiny home villages to help get unhoused individuals into transitional shelter, or making changes to their tax and zoning laws to incentivize affordable home building. This week on Let's Talk New Mexico, we will be examining the housing crisis, looking at how we got to this point and how our communities can pivot to help make sure that New Mexicans can get the housing that they need. And we have questions for our listeners too. Are you a low-income family that has struggled to find a place to live? We want to hear your story. And what costs took you by surprise when trying to find a home to rent or buy? What kind of approaches do you think that lawmakers should consider when trying to alleviate our housing shortage? You can email us at letstalk@kunm.org or give us a call at 505-277-5866. That's 505-277-5866 or KUNM. I am joined in the studio this morning by Tammy Feeblecorn, the Albuquerque City Councilor for District 7. Good morning, Tammy.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
And we have Terry Brunner with us as well, the Director of the Metropolitan Redevelopment Agency in Albuquerque. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And Isidoro Hernandez, CEO of Housing New Mexico, MFA. And I appreciate you coming in today.
Thank you for having us.
Even with our difficult parking situation. So I'd actually like to start with one aspect of housing that I feel sometimes gets overlooked, which is how important stable shelter is for folks who are in substance abuse recovery or are dealing with mental health issues. Bernalillo County's Tiny Home Village is a transitional housing program in Albuquerque's International District. It consists of 30 individuals, 120 square foot homes, each with heating and cooling, a queen-size bed, shelving, small refrigerator, and a desk. These units surround a larger village house with a kitchen, laundry, and space for dining and recreation. I spoke to Wayne Lindstrom, Deputy County Manager for Behavioral Health at Bernalillo County earlier, about the tiny home village and how a lack of permanent supportive housing may impact its residents' future. Here's my conversation with Wayne. And specifically, I wanted to focus on the tiny home village in eastern Albuquerque. What is its purpose and how does it function?
Well, its purpose is to serve as transitional housing for those who have um, been through treatment for a behavioral health condition, primarily a substance use disorder. Uh, but these days, there are a lot of folks who may have mental health conditions in addition to being dependent on a substance or polysubstance use. I want to emphasize how central housing is to recovery. I got invited by a gentleman who was in recovery to his home. And we sat down and got to know each other a bit. And then eventually he said, you professionals have really had it backwards. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, I've suffered from severe mental illness most of my life. And I was always told that if I just got a job, everything would turn out and I'd be okay. He said, I held hundreds of jobs. He said, I just could never keep them because I didn't have a home. I didn't have a stable residence. And until I was able to get a stable residence, could I maintain and sustain a path to recovery from my mental illness. He was, functioning extremely well as a member of the community, etc. Somebody meeting him on the street would have no idea that he's had this kind of history, etc. And I never forgot about that lesson. And as time has gone on, more research has demonstrated what a critical foundation element that is to somebody being able um, to launch a recovery trajectory, if you will, that they could sustain over time.
I mean, it sounds like what you're saying is that housing is an essential part of treatment.
Absolutely. So we build supports around people so they're not feeling alone and isolated And when they're starting to feel depressed or a bit hopeless or whatever, there's a group of individuals and other resources that are there to support them to sustain their recovery.
So after that period of time that they're there, and when they're looking to move into more permanent housing, how do you go about like finding that? Because that seems to be, something that we're facing a real shortage of in Albuquerque.
Well, it'd be different paths for different individuals. But if, for example, somebody has a skill and is employable, etc., we will first help them to do that, and we don't charge any rent at Tiny Home Village. So if what it takes is for them to accumulate enough savings to be able to make their first month's rent and make their security deposit, they can actually go out in the open market, for a rental or an efficiency or, whatever the case may be. If somebody has complex needs that include their substance use disorder, severe mental illness, etc., we do have a dearth of what we call permanent supportive housing. Um, Hope Works, operates Hope Village, for example, which is one of the few permanent supportive housing. But because it's permanent supportive housing, it's not like transitional housing where you've got over the course of a year people coming and being discharged, etc. It, they stay permanent unless something else happens that you know they can't be sustained there any longer. So that's the other challenge we have is how do we build more permanent supportive housing?
So currently you have 30 units, and that's 30 individuals, I suppose, at a time.
Correct.
Over the lifetime of the village, like how many people have gone through the treatment successfully and gone on to have permanent housing?
Well, before we go there, I just want to point out that we purchased the Albuquerque Indian Center, and this land that Tiny Home Village sits on had all belonged to the Albuquerque Indian Center, but they shut down about a year ago. And because of the relationship we had with them, they gave us right of first refusal to buy that remaining property where their center had been housed. And so we took them up on that offer and we purchased it. And we're right now going through the design phase of designing and constructing a minimum of another 18 tiny homes. So that will be over a 50% expansion, if you will. In terms of how many have gone through and dispositions, that's not something I have in my head. Yeah, I would say the overwhelming majority, that's the case. Because, like I said, we keep them on average 4 to 6 months. But if it took 18 months to make that kind of transition for them, that's what we'll do.
This program seems like it has been pretty successful in terms of transitional housing. As you mentioned, there is a need for supportive permanent housing. Is there any chance that something like this program could be adapted into a more permanent state for residents?
That I certainly wouldn't advocate that tiny home village be converted, because it would then cease to serve the purpose it currently does. I think that, as the state and county municipalities, um, bring greater resources to bear, etcetera, we need to, quite frankly, build a continuum of housing options.
Well, thank you so much for talking to me today,
Oh,
Wayne.
sure. Anytime.
Okay, and that was Wayne Lindstrom, the Deputy County Manager for Behavioral Health at Bernalillo County. Now, Tammy Feeblecorn, the City Councilor for District 7 in Albuquerque, I'd like to turn to you. Albuquerque is New Mexico's largest city, and we've all heard that the affordable housing situation is pretty dire here. But can you kind of break that down for me? What do we mean by affordable housing, and what are our needs?
Sure. So, yes, we have a pretty serious housing crisis in general in Albuquerque. We have a shortage of housing units at every income level, but particularly affordable housing. And something that is affordable is 30% or less of someone's income. And so that's a very small amount of rent for most people in our community. And there are just very few available rental units for folks in that income range. We really need to be doing a lot more to make sure that we're building new units. We need large scale multifamily. We need gentle density in residential areas. We need to do a lot of those types of things to really be creating the housing that is needed for folks to stem the, not even a trickle, but a flood of homelessness in our community.
Can you tell me what you mean by gentle density?
Sure. Gentle density is, if you're in a single family, predominantly single family area, gentle density would be something that would allow a few more houses or a few more families in that area. We're talking about things like casitas, making your house into a duplex, something that gives a little bit of a dignified housing option for just one or two more families per neighborhood.
Okay, we have an email from John who says building more luxury housing alone will not create more affordable housing. We must build more housing that is affordable for people to own and live in. He also says that we need to update our zoning and subdivision laws to allow splitting lots to create access to new houses in the rear. Is this kind of what you mean by gentle density?
Exactly what I mean by gentle density. We should think through, we have large lots, we have large single family homes. The size of families is getting smaller and smaller. In my zip code in the 50s, there were over almost 4 people per house. And now most everyone on my street is 1 to 2 people per house. And we're still living in these giant lots with these giant homes. And so, yes, splitting a lot, allowing me to have a casita in my backyard, allowing me, quite frankly, to just put up a wall in the middle of my house and create another housing unit for someone by creating a duplex. Those are easy things to do that allow us to have slightly more affordable housing. It's certainly cheaper to build a casita than to build a single family home. And so those kind of things should be allowed, but they are not allowed in our current integrated development ordinance, our zoning laws for the city of Albuquerque.
I'd like to talk to our listeners for a moment. We'd love to know what what you guys think about ideas like changing zip codes, changing zoning codes to allow for more affordable housing or even something like rent control. Would those things help alleviate the problems or are there downsides? We want to hear your takes, so call 505-277-5866. And Tammy, what do you think is driving this housing shortage?
So I think there's a couple of things. The biggest problem that we have is that rental units are increasing in price dramatically. I have constituents call me every single week saying my rent is going up 50, 60, 70% in one fell swoop. And that is incredible to think about. If you're in an apartment that costs $1,000 a month and that's the most you can possibly afford, and that goes up to $1,500, $1,600, that is a serious problem. So we see landlords raising rent, and then, like I said, we see housing family sizes going down, and so fewer and fewer people are housed in the existing housing stock. And so those two things together are really driving a lack of housing for everyone, particularly affordable housing, and it really is contributing to the epidemic we see of homelessness on our streets.
And what are you hearing from your constituents in District 7? What sorts of frustrations are they vocalizing to you?
Well, it's very frustrating to be in an apartment that you can barely afford and have the rent raise that much. And so not a week goes by that I don't hear from a constituent that is concerned that they are going to become homeless in the near future. And that is really heartbreaking. And there's very few resources that I can send to them because we as a city have not done all we need to do to be helping folks stay housed, but then also creating that affordable housing for them to choose from.
This is Let's Talk New Mexico on 89.9 KUNM. I'm Ty Bannerman. We are talking about New Mexico's shortage of affordable housing, and we want to hear about your experiences trying to find a place to live that's within your budget. Dial 505-277-5866, and we will be right back. And welcome back to Let's Talk New Mexico. I'm Ty Bannerman. We are discussing affordable housing in New Mexico. You can email comments to us at letstalk@kunm.org or give us a ring at 505-277-8866. KUNM. Right now, I'm speaking with Tammy Feeblecorn, the city councilor for District 7 in Albuquerque. And Tammy, I wanted to ask you about something that Wayne Lindstrom mentioned in the pre-recorded interview earlier, basically saying that there is a need for permanent supportive housing in Albuquerque. That's housing for folks who are maybe dealing with substance abuse recovery or some sort of mental health issue where they need to continue to have support from outside. How does that kind of housing fit into your list of priorities as a counselor?
Yeah, it's super important. It's important to remember also that we just a decade ago had no type of homelessness shelters. We had no supportive housing, nothing from our city. And so in a really short time, we've built up overnight shelters. We have the gateway system. We work really closely with the county and Dr. Lindstrom to create, behavioral health and abuse recovery types of situations. But there is a lot more that needs to be done. We need a lot of transitional housing. We get folks into overnight sheltering or the tiny village at the county, and we have few places to send them when they are ready to go somewhere else. And so that is huge. It's almost as important as getting more affordable housing, but they both take a lot of money and a prioritization from the elected officials in our community, and that has not always been there. So we've got a long way to go.
Okay, we have a phone call from Molly in Albuquerque. Good morning, Molly. What is your comment or question today?
Yeah, I live close to the railroad tracks, and there's some really big lots that are empty all along that corridor. And our neighborhood was very instrumental in getting a quiet zone to go through there. So the trains, and it is owned by the DOT now, which only has a freighter, the rail runner, and the Amtrak going by there. So, I mean, there's so much property along that corridor that could be developed if there was some sort of barrier. They put a barrier along the freeway for people to drive through, and it would just open up inner city lots to being developed if they weren't, so susceptible to what goes on in that corridor with homelessness and stuff. So I just think it would be a good idea to take a look at that.
Thank you so much, Molly. So Terry Brunner, you're with the Metropolitan Redevelopment Agency here in Albuquerque. You guys do a lot of work with incentivizing housing in places exactly like Molly's talking about. Are there any plans in the future to perhaps address housing along the railroad corridor?
Sure. Yeah. And I think that what Molly brought up was really important. We have a lot of land in the, I guess you could call it, interior of the city that needs to be developed, could be put to use. And, we have a very successful 7-year tax abatement program we started a few years ago that basically freezes taxes on development in the crucial first few years of the project. And we just lobbied the legislature to increase that to 14 years, which is kind of the national standard. And we really expect that will enhance the ability of developers to look at those larger lots and want to do something with them. We have an interesting dynamic going on right now where the county assessor is assessing properties now at their highest and best use. So a vacant lot that might have been, a cost of about, $2,000 a year in property taxes because it was assessed as a vacant lot is now being assessed by the assessor as having an apartment complex on it and having a much larger tax bill. So we've already seen a lot of developers come to us to try to avoid that huge tax bill and get something started on that lot and put it to its highest and best use. So we are excited about that program. We think it's really spurred a lot of development. We have several hundred units we've built and 700 in the pipeline as a result of that program. So that should activate these vacant lots that we have around the city center.
Okay, well, great. Thanks, Terry. And we have a call from Carlos in Santa Fe. Good morning, Carlos. What is your comment today?
Thanks for having me. I wanted to comment that if you're talking about a shortage of housing and you're looking at rent control as well, those two ideas are going to work against each other. Rent control just benefits a few people who happen to lock in those rent-controlled housing units. When it also shortens the supply of new housing because those those apartments will tend to just stay locked in by those people who benefited. So younger people who come to buy their first houses are not going to find available units to rent. Also, it's also going to take the incentive, if you want to incentivize developers to do more construction and also maintain buildings, rent control kind of works against that, takes out any sort of incentive from developers and investors.
Okay, well, thank you, Carlos. So, Tammy, you have championed rent control in the past. Can you address Carlos's thoughts on that?
Sure. Great points. I'm not a big fan of rent control. What I want is rent stabilization. And those are two different things, but under the state law, neither are allowed. And so rent control is kind of what people think of from New York in the 70s, where the rent is $1,000 and it will remain $1,000 forever. Rent stabilization is more saying, okay, everybody that's in an apartment right now, say you're paying $1,000 a month, you can't raise that by 70% in one fell swoop. You have to do something incrementally. So a rent stabilization policy would be, you can't raise rent more than 10, 15% a year so that people have a way to actually maintain their housing rather than being evicted when those large increases go through and out on the street. Another point that I heard that I think it's a valid one is that we really do want renters to have their properties maintained. And there's two ways to do that. And I think one should be that we incentivize good buildings. But we also, in the city of Albuquerque, have requirements for rental units. They have to be habitable. They have to have cooling. They have to have heating. They have to have running water. Those are important, and we prioritize enforcement of that in our planning and zoning committee, in our planning department. So, I don't want to rely just on landlords doing the right thing. We have laws to protect renters in our city.
Okay, we got a comment on our website from Shannon that I think is relevant to this conversation. Let's hear from Shannon.
Just a message for you all about housing in New Mexico and things that would help. I would include that both Bernalillo County and the city of Albuquerque make building and or rehabbing anything a nightmare. They can't get your permits approved in anything like Glacier time zone. It's an absolute nightmare.
Okay, and Tammy, what are your thoughts on that?
I do agree that there have been some problems with our permitting processes. That time frame for all of those permit applications is shrinking dramatically, and I'm really proud of the work that the planning department's doing. And so I think we're heading in the right direction, but I don't think that is the one thing that has kept affordable housing from being developed. I think it really is the cost of construction, and that is something that we don't have any control over. So we work with developers, a lot of the work that Terry does with the MR agency, but our city in general works with the developers to try to fill the financing gap so that we can get those affordable housing units onto the market as soon as possible.
And earlier this year, you were a proponent of zoning reform in Albuquerque. Could you talk about the kind of zoning that you were interested in fixing and how that would help address the housing needs?
Sure. As I have been doing since I took office, I proposed some gentle density allowances, things like less parking requirements, especially on transit corridors because they're on a transit corridor, allowance for duplexes, easier to have a casita, things that allow a few more families dignified housing throughout our community. And as they have every year since I took office, they failed on a 5-4 vote. And so we do have a problem in our city. We are not updating our zoning code to allow more housing to be developed, and it's a real problem. I have people call me that live in my district that say, I really want a casita in my backyard. I really want to be able to offer a family a house. I live on a corner. I have a giant lot. Can I please put in a second house? And the answer is no, not under our regulations.
Okay. Well, Terry Brunner, I'd like to go ahead and bring you into the conversation again now. You're the CEO of the Metropolitan Redevelopment Agency in Albuquerque. Your agency is directly involved in some high-profile redevelopment projects that a lot of folks have their eyes on, including the rehabilitation of the old towers at San Mateo and Central, which are slated to be turned into mixed-rate housing. Before we get into that, however, I'd like to just talk to you about the kind of work that the MRA does. So the MRA oversees what are known as metropolitan redevelopment areas. What are these? How do they figure into the future of Albuquerque's affordable housing market?
So, metropolitan redevelopment areas have been around in the city of Albuquerque for about 50 years and really came out of the 1970s urban renewal sort of movement. And they've morphed and changed, over that time to really make different attempts at looking at areas that by state statute are declared slum or blighted and rehabbing that housing, the built environment, the commercial areas. And that for us really means that 19 areas have been declared up and down Central and kind of up and down 2nd, 4th Street, Broadway. We have one in Manal. We have one that's up on I-25. So those are all areas that the city councils currently and in the past have declared, need a special treatment. And what we're allowed to do is give developers direct incentives to encourage redevelopment of those areas. It makes us an exception to what we call in the state the anti-donation clause, that in the state constitution prevents government resources being used for a private entity. Well, we're allowed to do some of that as long as the developer is in a contract with us to say that they're going to do what they intend to do to receive those resources. So on developments like Park Central, which is the San Mateo and Central Towers, the Somos development on Louisiana and Central, those are being developed. One is by a private developer, one is by a nonprofit housing developer, and we will combine our incentives. We'll look at the financial picture of that development and try to figure out where they're missing funds and apply our tax abatement program or a direct incentive or something like that, some fee and permit reductions, whatever it needs to kind of get it moving. And we do that because New Mexico and Albuquerque in particular really don't have a lot of affordable and market rate housing developers. A lot of them are in Houston and Denver and Phoenix. And we're trying to encourage that they develop this kind of housing. They keep developing. Their crews are at work. Their subcontractors are working hard to develop housing. So we need this vibrant housing development market, really. And it's a whole picture of things that you're putting together that keep it moving along. So the Park Central apartments at San Mateo and Central are developed by somebody from Houston who took an interest in our market, and he loves the fact that development is on a transit line and that people that maybe work at UNM can hop on the ART bus and get to UNM. That's the kind of development we like to see that really rehabs that neighborhood and gets it renovated and going in a positive direction.
So I was looking over the MRA's annual report. You guys do all kinds of different developments, not just residential. But I noticed that in 2025, there were only 20 housing units created for MR areas, but there are 700 housing units in the pipeline now. Does this reflect a pivot or a new set of priorities for housing with the MRA?
Well, it reflects, I think, kind of what I alluded to before, and that is, creating a consistent pipeline of those housing units. So developers are always building, and they're moving through the process, and there's activity being generated at all times. We unfortunately kind of skip from project to project, and we sit and we wait for the next person to show up with an idea. I don't like doing that. I would love to have ideas every week and developments going. So we're optimistic that our property tax abatement that's been extended to 14 years creates a more vigorous environment around development. And I'd also say, Albuquerque is building more housing units than it's really ever built. This was not something we did 10 years ago. And so we are catching up and trying to keep this train moving towards more positive development and like I said, keeping developers and contractors and everybody busy.
And as you mentioned, one of the highest profile housing redevelopments in Albuquerque is the rehabilitation of the old bank tower and its smaller sister tower on San Mateo and Central. Both of these are slated to be turned into mixed income apartments. I wondered if you could maybe use this project as an example and walk us through the process of how a blighted property goes from basically abandoned to slated for redevelopment with the MRA's help.
Sure. So that project, was sitting kind of neglected for a while. It used to be office buildings. The state of New Mexico was there. A lot of people went there to file their gross receipts taxes. But it was up for auction for like 2 years. It stood for auction on the internet, and a guy came along and took an interest in it, and pieced together the fact that it's in a high traffic corner at Central and San Mateo. It's on a transit line, and he came to us and said, "That's what I like. I want a development on a transit line, and you have one. It makes total sense." And so he came to us, and we worked with him with both our housing agency and the Metropolitan Redevelopment Agency to package some incentives together. We kind of asked him, "What's it going to take to make this cash flow for you to take on this very difficult development?" And then we patched together the funds and looked at both our affordable housing funds and our metropolitan redevelopment funds and our tax abatement program to piece them together and kind of, in a sense, package a deal for that developer. And it took a while. I mean, because it's a very tricky, difficult development to take towers and rehab them. It's not easy. So we pushed and pushed and pushed on him and his crew and got them moving through the Albuquerque Development Commission, ultimately through the city council, and got approvals for his project. And that's kind of how we work it. What I really like, too, about that I want to express to listeners is that on that San Mateo and Central area, we have several projects going. So you're creating like kind of catalytic development environment, and that's what we like to see. Those developers look to across the street, and they try to see what's going on there, what's going on 2 blocks away. And that's what this developer saw, is he saw some good things happening in that area that made it worth his investment.
Well, I know a lot of times neighborhoods adjacent to projects like this can get concerned about what they perceive as, quote, a housing project going up nearby. Do you see that with the San Mateo Towers?
Well, I'm pleased to say that the neighborhood was like the primary advocate outside of the developer for this project. I mean, they showed up every one of our events and talked about the fact that they wanted to see this blighted property that was an attraction for crime and bad behavior to get something done with it and help revitalize their neighborhood. So it's been really nice that they have shown up and voiced their support. And we have a couple private projects, a townhome project, a farm stand that's going through a rehab, that have also showed up to express their support, that are just down the street from the project because they see it as a really catalytic change for their neighborhood.
Okay, we are going to go to a quick break. You are listening to Let's Talk New Mexico on 89.9 KUNM. I'm Ty Bannerman. Stay right here. Welcome back to Let's Talk New Mexico. We are discussing New Mexico's housing shortage. And now I would like to bring in Isidoro Hernandez into the conversation. Isidoro is the CEO of Housing New Mexico MFA, an organization that provides financing for affordable housing and related services throughout the state. Thanks for joining me, Isidoro.
Thank you for having us.
So we have been focused a lot in this conversation on Albuquerque, but of course that is not the only city in New Mexico that's facing affordable housing shortages. Can you tell us about how things are looking in Santa Fe? What unique issues affect housing in the capital city?
Well, I think the need for housing goes across the state from corner to corner. In the most populated areas, obviously, you see an increased need. In Santa Fe, it is one of the counties or locations that we consider a high-cost county, and it happens to have the highest price of a sales medium-priced home. I think it's a little over $600,000, followed closely by Los Alamos, Taos, and Ruidoso.
And so Housing New Mexico MFA works to get affordable housing projects off the ground. Do you have projects in Santa Fe that you guys are working on?
We do have several projects in Santa Fe and across the state. In Santa Fe, one of the newest projects that's currently under construction is a 312-unit complex for families, or targeted for families with children.
And do you find that in Santa Fe, we talked about how the neighborhood around the San Mateo Towers has been mostly pretty positive. What's the reaction in Santa Fe like when these developments go up?
I think there's a realization across the state that there's a need for housing. And so in most cases, it's very supported and a welcome addition to the neighborhoods to increase that housing, both on the rental side that we've been discussing quite a bit, but also on the single family side. And there's some developments in Santa Fe that we've funded for single family or home ownership as well.
And you work all the way across the state, so that includes a lot of rural communities. Do these come with unique challenges?
I think each community has its own needs and challenges, but I think they are all very supportive. Uh, in some of the more remote rural areas, some of the challenges could be the lack of labor or contractors there, and having to bring folks in from a neighboring city, so that the cost may go up a little bit, and maybe some of the materials that wouldn't be there at the local areas. But generally, I think there's the need across the state is high. There was a recent study that we've commissioned that it's close to being completed, but some of the recent data or the updated data shows that there's about a 58,000 unit shortage across the state, about 40,000 being on the single family side and another 18,000 on the rental side.
Oh my goodness. And Housing New Mexico offers like different kinds of programs to assist people with both housing and rentals, correct?
That is correct. As the state's housing agency, we're not a state agency or a quasi-governmental agency, but we serve the state across the spectrum. Well, we started out back in 1975 with just basically being a single program entity doing our first-time home buyer or home ownership program. We now serve the entire continuum of housing from homelessness to home ownership. We have close to 40 programs, and our business model is that we don't do many things directly. We have a few programs that we do directly, but most of them we do through a network of partners across the state. We have close to 400 partners across the state that help us deliver the services at the local level, and they do a tremendous job and gives us a lot of leverage and the ability to really be able to deploy the money across the state in a very efficient manner.
And if folks are listening at home and they might be interested in some of these programs, how can they find out more?
They can go to our website or call us directly. housingnm.org would be our website, and they can find a lot of information there. I will say that with 40 programs, it's pretty crowded and may be hard to find stuff, but they can always use a search button or definitely give us a call, and we can point them in the right direction, either with our staff directly or through some of our partners in their neighborhood.
And what about renters? I know a lot of folks say that it's pretty much impossible to find an affordable home to rent in Santa Fe. What is Housing New Mexico doing to kind of help alleviate that?
I think, and there was a little bit of discussion earlier on the increases in rental payments across the state. I think one of the components there that lends to that is the supply of housing and not having sufficient housing, and a lot of things that kind of lead to that, to include the planning and zoning, the entitlement process. We talked about the increased cost of labor and materials. But proud to say that we currently have 53 developments across the state, rental developments composing about 5,000 units that are in some phase of construction or another. And we, on an annual basis, add maybe 10 to 15 to that pipeline. Some come off as they get placed in service. So there's has been mentioned earlier. I think we're making a lot of progress in putting more units on the ground and placing them in the service. So I think that's really going to help with some of the demand and the price increases. Hopefully, will moderate and start coming down a little bit.
And when are you expecting those to come online?
Each development takes anywhere from 18 to 30 months from the time that they're closed to complete it, especially the big rental developments. So each year we see 10 to 15 that get placed in service, but we're adding more as to Mr. Bruner's comment a little bit earlier, keeping developments in the pipeline so that we keep the labor force and the developers out there working on, and it's not a stop and go, but it's a continuous pipeline that is producing units.
Okay, and so I'd like to move into what I sort of consider our lightning round of the conversation. I'm going to put the same question to each of you, and just tell me what you think. If you could change one law or regulation in New Mexico to make affordable housing easier to access, what would it be? And let's start with you, Isidoro.
Well, that's a tough one because there's several things that can be done, but I would say streamlining the planning and zoning or the permitting process, I think, would go a long ways.
Okay. And Tammy?
I would change the integrated development ordinance in the city of Albuquerque to allow for gentle density.
And Terry?
I think it'd be great if the state could invest in metropolitan redevelopment areas around the state.
Okay. And I do have a comment from Shannon. This is actually the second part of the comment that she left on our website. Let's go ahead and hear from Shannon.
Also, there are large development housing companies buying up properties, paying way beyond market price, and then they hold them instead of renovating them and getting them back out on the market for affordable housing or at least middle income housing. They hold them. They can compete with other local buyers because they can purchase these buildings at a higher cost and then afford to just hold them and not do anything with them. So there's more than just the zoning restrictions and the other construction restrictions that are going on, at least in Albuquerque and the greater Bernalillo County area.
Okay, and Tammy, I'm going to put this question to you because I know you have to step out very quickly. So, what is your what are your thoughts on what Shannon said?
I completely agree. I think we have a lot of folks coming into our community, buying up property and not doing much with it. And so there's two things about that. One, Terry mentioned earlier that our assessor is actually assessing these properties at its highest and best use now. And so that hurts. If you have an empty lot and you're doing nothing with it, but you're paying taxes on it as if it were a large-scale development, you're incentivized to actually do something with that property. The other concern I have in Albuquerque is we see out-of-state folks coming in, buying up a lot of single-family homes and taking them out of the rental market and putting them into the short-term rental market. And so we see, you might be able to make a lot more money on those short-term rentals, but every one of those houses that are in the short-term rental market are out of the long-term rental market, and that is one less house available for families to move into. And so we have tried unsuccessfully 3 times to limit the number of short-term rentals in our community so that we make sure that we are maximizing the amount of rental stock that's available for long-term families or long-term use by families that live in our community.
And we're speaking about things like Airbnb, correct?
Right.
Okay. And then I had a question for you, Isidoro, about some of these rural communities that maybe they just don't have enough units available at all. How does your program help them?
We have several programs to address both on the rental and the single family side. I mentioned we have 30, but the programs that we have, I'll give you an example of a recent program that we just launched. It's called the ZIP program, Zero Interest Home Builder Program. This is where we provide a line of credit at 0% interest for builders that are looking to build entry-level homes, and we have criteria for that. It's starting to take off, and our pipeline is building. We currently have a pipeline of approaching about 500 units that are being processed through our single-family development programs. Another one is we have our first-time home buyer program, or our home ownership program. Last year, we assisted over 2,200 families become first-time home buyers, and that includes not only a below-market interest rate, but down payment assistance to go along with it. And one other program that I'll mention that we're very excited about is called our ROCK program. This is our Restoring Our Communities program. It's a program where we provide funding to developers out there or nonprofits to purchase abandoned or foreclosed homes, fix them up, and sell them to people that are, in the workforce, low to moderate income folks. And I think every community across the state has homes that are abandoned or foreclosed and are attracting maybe crime. And so this is starting to really help in some of these neighborhoods and pick them up. So it's something that in the rural areas sometimes just 5 or 10 homes would do the job. Then, here in Albuquerque, we need, hundreds and thousands of homes in some of these smaller communities with just 5 or 10 homes.
Right.
Yeah.
So I know over the last year or so, the funding landscape has changed a lot, especially at the federal level, with big reductions in the Housing and Urban Development Department and that sort of thing. Terry, I wanted to ask you, how is that affecting your work with the Metropolitan Redevelopment Agency?
Well, I think that first and foremost, the Trump administration has created an uncertainty around federal programs that I think depresses a lot of activity, and it is kind of not only a funding issue but a staffing issue, where reductions in staff at HUD and Department of Treasury that oversee the incentive programs can sometimes slow them down. I used to be a federal appointee at the U.S. Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, and we saw a little of this during sequestration. When you start shrinking these staffs, the less responsive they're able to be. And so when a developer comes in our door, we want to have a whole menu of options for them financially, and we're just seeing some of those options get limited, and it like I said depresses a bit the amount of activity that we're going to see, and it creates a bit of uncertainty too, as to whether or not my agency or our housing agency are going to have those low-income housing tax credits, or a below market rate lender that can come in that's supported with U.S. Department of Treasury funds or whatever to help that developer. So I think that is where the landscape has shifted. I'm hoping we can get out of that. I hope that we see more activity by the state. I think state and localities and municipalities are now having to step in and build supports around housing that maybe they didn't have to do in the past because the federal government was so involved. So I think it has, if there is a positive note to it, it has forced the city, the county, and others to step up their game and try to assist at the local level.
And Isidoro, are you seeing the same sorts of things?
We manage or administer a handful or a couple handfuls of federal programs, and I will say that definitely there's been some uncertainty there in the last year or so, but what we've experienced is that the funding has been either level or in some cases increased a little bit. There was a recent change that was made to the low-income housing tax credit program and the 4% tax credits in particular. Won't get into the details of those programs there, but it actually gave us twice the capacity of what we can do on the 4% tax credit. So it's an increase that will be significant, I think, not only in New Mexico, but across the nation. And then also some recent executive orders. And I think Terry would agree that the regulatory environment out there sometimes makes it very difficult. So kind of decreasing some of those requirements, I think, will be helpful. It'll take a while for those to percolate through the system, but we've seen some positive changes, and we at this point have not seen any decreases in funding from either HUD or DOE or the IRS and some of the programs that we administer.
And speaking about kind of the regulatory environment, there are a lot of proposed solutions to solving this housing shortage, everything from rent control to zoning changes to tax credits. Do you think that there are any that are the wrong approach that are often discussed?
I'll just go just because it was discussed a little bit earlier. I think our approach, instead of doing rent control, is to continue to build more affordable units that up front where the underwriting and the finances are baked into the development of that project, if you will, so that we don't need rent control. The rent controls are already baked in up front with the affordability requirements of the various programs that we bring in, and just putting more units on the ground, I think, is really going to help with that.
Okay, what about you, Terry?
Yeah, I think there's a movement towards kind of loosening up the regulatory environment around housing, and I think it has prompted a good discussion about how we build rental units. I think we have discussions about AMI, that area median income, and where your units are related to that. It used to always be that you'd go by 85% or whatever, and that was a very strict federal standard. But now people talk about 95% or 60%, and they're trying to weave their way around, I think, old concepts of how you do affordable housing. So I think that has been a positive change. That across the nation is really changing. And I'll just say, I participated in a program with Canada and some European countries that all have this problem, which kind of was some reassurance that everybody's dealing with the changes in the way people live and they work and the kind of housing they want. And so a lot of the old approaches, I think, are being reevaluated, which is a positive development and has led to a more vigorous debate around how we approach rental housing.
Okay, and I have one more question for both of you, which is basically, how optimistic are you that we can address this problem over the next few years? Terry, let's start with you.
I'm optimistic. I said this earlier. The city of Albuquerque is building so many more housing units than it ever has built. We weren't in this business really a decade or so ago. And so you're seeing, I think, Albuquerque step up a bit, and that's a positive development. Our constituents are demanding that we do more, so our city council is involved as well. And I think that it's moving in a positive direction. I like what the legislature's done, and what we've seen out of the housing agencies too. So I'm optimistic about it.
All right, and Isidoro, same question.
I feel the same way Terry does. I'm very optimistic, and I'll start from maybe the top down to the local level. So I think at the federal government, there's a recognition that more needs to be done. And some laws have been passed or executive orders. I think on the House side, I'm going to forget the name of the exact bills but on the House side, they're considering some housing reform. On the Senate side, something passed here recently. So I see that. I think at our state level here, our legislators see the need for more housing, and they're investing more money into that. So I see that happening. I think at the local levels, the local governments are also looking at how do we streamline, how do we do things differently to make it a little bit easier for development and make it not as costly. I know at our level and our board is doing the same thing. And I say even the builders and the providers out there want to do more. A lot of discussions with the Home Builders Association lately, and they're looking at doing some more stuff and very interested in more entry-level houses and just increasing the supply out there. So I see a bright future for us here. It's not going to happen overnight, but I see it coming.
Well, that's good to hear, but I am sorry to say that we have reached the end of the hour. Thanks to everyone who called in or emailed. Thanks to our guests, Albuquerque City Councilor Tammy Feeblecorn, Terry Brunner, Director of the Metropolitan Redevelopment Agency in Albuquerque, Isidoro Hernandez, CEO of Housing New Mexico, MFA, and in pre-recorded form, Deputy County Manager for Behavioral Health for Bernalillo County, Wayne Lindstrom. You can comment on this show by email at letstalk@kunm.org or find us on your favorite social media. Audio from today's show will be streaming at kunm.org soon. You can also get the Let's Talk New Mexico podcast from Apple or Spotify. Come back next week for our annual Best of Let's Talk New Mexico show during KUNM's spring fundraiser. Our engineer today is Marino Spencer. Florian Knowles handled the phones. Megan Kamrick and Bryce Dix produced the show this week. I'm Ty Bannerman for Let's Talk New Mexico on 89.9 KUNM.